What's going on, guys, and welcome back. Get ready for a toxic week in Marvel Snap as Man-Thing arrives to the game. We're going to talk about where he fits into Marvel Snap, the best decks, combos, and everything around the archetype. Now, with that, we're also going to talk about the top 10 toxic and disrupt cards in Marvel Snap. Which ones truly make a difference? Lastly, guys, we're going to finish on our buff and nerf wish list. We had a pretty dry content patch, but we have an OTA Thursday, and we're going to talk about which cards need some love, which other ones need to be tamed down a bit. We're going to talk about that all today and more on this episode of the Snapchat. And as always, I'm joined by Mr. Alex Kocha. Hello, Alex. Happy continuation of spooky season. We are now a week past Elsa coming to the game. How are we doing?
I'm doing great, Cozy. I mean, this has been a wild week in Marvel Snap. Been loving the weekend missions. They've been completely changed, eh? They're much more accessible. We're getting some rewards. But Cozy, I have a problem. I got to take it up with you. I'm trying to do my Elsa Bloodstone weekend missions, trying to play my Nightcrawlers, zooing out with my Blood Flood deck, and then all of a sudden, I got Sandman everywhere. I'm like, why is Sandman all over the place? And then, sure enough, I go to my favorite YouTube channel, Cozy Snap, and I see it. How dare you reintroduce Sandman into the meta?
Dude, everyone, when I do like a Galactus deck or Sandman, like I feel like I've joined the dark side. I feel bad. Like I click publish and it's not a good feeling to be had. But it's, to be fair, my gosh, does it work against Elsa? Yeah, I know. I haven't played it since. I got it out there. I did the deed. Some of the comments were not exactly happy, but yeah, man, with the Doom buff again too, and with Mobius, Sandman is Sandman, and he's in a pretty good spot. But yeah, with that, that's a toxic deck. We have a toxic week, man. We obviously have Man-Thing coming out, and we broke him down a lot last week. Excited to continue that and also talk about like the archetype in general. I think a lot of people, this might be their first or like serious attempt into playing kind of the disrupt toxic archetype. So excited to break that down with you. But Elsa, I know we're going to talk about it on your channel. We'll get to your subjects. Initial thoughts on the card and the new season pass?
I like her. I like the fact that it's bringing back all new archetypes, like, you know, Zoo's back. It's been a card that's like, Loki was a Loki card. Like, Loki created its own archetype, right? And when you're playing a Loki deck, you're playing a Loki deck. I felt like Elsa is being splashed into so many different things. Yeah. Silky Smooth, Flood, Shuri. It's like been an add-on to so many things, and for that reason, I've really liked it.
She's made a lot of decks better. She's obvious when like she's getting out of control. Like, you know, when you see that Kitty Pryde get like the third buff, you're like, I'm out. Like it's obvious when she's getting a bit too much. I think she's counterable and altogether a good addition. But I know we'll talk about that more. Definitely did what we both thought. I think we were pretty accurate in our discussions last week on how we thought Elsa was going to be. And with that, like, what do we break it down on your side of the channel, Alex?
On my side of the channel, we're going to be discussing Elsa Bloodstone and kind of its impact on the meta thus far and our initial first impressions of its decks and its gameplay. We're also going to be talking about the top 10 win rate cards in Marvel Snap. We're going to be giving our impressions on what the most winningest cards in Marvel Snap are. And then finally, our favorite cards in October thus far. It's only been a week, but the meta has shifted significantly, and I'm interested in hearing, Cozy, from you, what your favorite cards at every cost are so far this season.
Yeah, I mean, listen, we're going to talk about it on the third subject, but the OTA and the content patch, I think together was a disappointment, to be said. Luckily, Elsa brought a lot with her, and so I think that definitely helped save what was going to be a continuation of what we saw in September. Now, to start off the season, Alex, what decks are you playing the most right now, if you were to say like a couple?
I mean, Blood Flood, like the Elsa Bloodstone Flood deck, and I've been really enjoying it. That's been a ton of fun. Loki feels like it's not quite as good that it used to be. I'm working on a completely new brew with Nimrod that I'm excited to be showing soon. But ultimately, I think that my last week has been primarily with Elsa Bloodstone. But I will say special shout out to W Snap, who came up with a fantastic Guardians base list, which I've been thoroughly enjoying. As soon as I saw Drax, I'm like, I gotta play this. This is like a lockdown Drax base list that also runs Alioth as a closer. Fantastic list, and I've been having a lot of fun with it.
What's better than one Elsa, dude, is two, like, no questions. I've been doing a lot of double up decks, which have been fun, and it kind of restored a different playstyle that I love and that I definitely think has a place in Snap. I think I have a guide coming out on that. And then Toxic, man. I've been doing a lot of Toxic. I think right now where the meta's at with Elsa, not just Sandman, but the traditional disrupt decks with the green goblins is what I've been all into. So I'm excited to bestow some of what I've learned because it's probably the archetype that I've learned over the course of a week or two the most from. That I thought I knew everything, but there's little kind of tricks and things that you can do to get better at predicting and playing and disrupting your opponent. So let's start out with Man-Thing. He comes out now, not tonight, which this will be the first time since we've been recording this. He comes out what will be Tuesday, and that'll be noon PST. You can calculate that time in your time zone. I think it's 3 p.m. your time, Alex. Man-Thing is a 4-cost, 5-power card with an ongoing effect. 1, 2, and 3-cost cards have -2 power on that location. What do you think of Man-Thing? Initial impressions?
Initial impressions is that he seems like he'd be very strong. I mean, when you consider -2 power across the board, and especially what the meta is right now, I think it's going to be pretty solid. Like, so last month, the Loki season, we had Loki, and then we had the Triple M coming out in the last week of the season. Man-Thing, to some degree, it feels like the Mobius to the Loki, whereas like Elsa Bloodstone, obviously bringing back zoo-based strategies, filling locations, and Man-Thing says, well, if you're going to do that, I'm going to punish you, right? So you're going to have to tech for that now. And so I like the counterbalance that's happening here. I think that the fact that it's coming out next week, if Elsa's too hot, Man-Thing should take a little bit off. And I actually like the card. I think that it's going to be pretty impactful. Yeah,
so I think a couple of things about it. My initial thoughts, and we're going to talk about what we usually do, the synergies, the decks, where we see him fitting in. Because of how good Shadow King's at the moment, that's already had a lot of Luke Cage slot into some decks. So obviously we have a card that has a direct counter to the fullest degree in a sense. But I do think there are some tricky things that you can do with the card in general. But on top of that, it might be one of the worst, I like to call them like premiere weeks, right? When the card comes out, you just have like a slew of decks playing them. And this one has one simple answer, right? And Luke Cage is one of those complement cards. So he's not really changing up how your deck works altogether. So he could have like a rough showcase, if that makes sense. But, both the Toxic archetype in the months ahead and Luke Cage aren't really going anywhere. But you're still forcing them to play down the card. So, in general, Man-Thing, I think he plays excellent on curve. That's where I want to start with Toxic. There are 4-cost cards that can fit into the Toxic archetype, like Sentry. But Alex, it's kind of a weird, turn 4, because you kind of have a lot to do on turn 5, where I think right away Man-Thing gives you a nice curve play. I think Ted here, Man-Thing, is going to be a really unique card to play on turn 6, right? So a lot of us are thinking turn 4, turn 5, but I like the idea of dropping him once you've seen where everything is at. And at that point, you're not giving away, right? You're not, the Luke Cage isn't a response, because at that point, you just play Man-Thing. They'd even know that you had it. Right? Doesn't that seem like a decent way to play him?
In ladder, yeah, I can definitely see that. Like, if you're looking at the surprise factor of Man-Thing, then 100% I can definitely see that working. Conquest might be trickier. You can only hit him once with it, right? So you're going to want to get him for 4 or 8 cubes. But from a ladder perspective, yeah, 4 cost, like, there's definitely some potential to take people by surprise. And if they have Luke Cage, then you just dodge that element of your game plan, right? And you just don't play it on turn 6. You play your backup, your Magneto or whatever it is that you're going to have in your deck. So yeah, no, I do like that call out. One thing I will say though is I was thinking about this, and I was like trying to like pen and paper a bunch of stuff with Man-Thing. I love doing this. And by the way, when I say pen and paper, I literally mean I have a Post-it note that I write like cards on and try to do synergies with. It's the way my mind works. I don't know. With Man-Thing, I kind of realized a couple things that no one's talking about. And it goes to show you how impactful the last month of Marvel Snap was. This is a 4-cost card that should interact with Zabu, but a 32% prevalence and meta share of Triple M has effectively taken Zabu out of people's minds, which is pretty wild. This is a card that should be working with Zabu, but the meta share of Triple M is so high that I don't think people are considering it in that style deck, which is interesting because Zabu should work with Sentry. It does. It works with Man-Thing. Now you're starting to see this new list coming up. But then Triple M, 33% meta share. It's crazy.
Yeah, so this is my initial first of all, isn't it funny? Like a 4-cost card used to come out, and it was just like the first thing you thought about was Zabu. And the heck, this guy's got the potential to be a 413, which I think clearly is insane. Definitely one of the more underrated cards to come out. When it comes to Zabu, you also have to think about this, and players need to think about this. Mobius is a 2-cost, Luke Cage is a 2-cost. You can't put every card in your deck there are definitely decks that play both of those cards, but you're causing them to use 2 energy for these tech cards twice, so you maybe can get one or the other off if you Zabu, or if you want to try to get what Man Thing is going to be known for. But a 3/5 at that, if you play with Zabu, even if they have the Luke Cage out, I mean, at least it's not like the worst, play line. It's intact with like Valor, Spider-Man. You have other turns to do some things. There isn't a ton of 4-cost cards at the moment that you would want inside of a Toxic deck, but definitely I think there will be some Zabu, Flood with like Hazmat, maybe Wong stuff going on. That's where I would see the Zabu interaction the most, Alex. But yeah, this guy, he's going to be so interesting because of the retroactive effect of hurting your own side. So without question, when we talk about synergy cards, which there's a lot of them, Luke Cage is going to be the synergy card because you kind of have to have him in there.
Yeah, you have to have him in there. And if you don't, then, I mean, is there creative ways to use the negative energy? And Man-Thing's case, like, not really. Like, I was trying to come up with that, like, hey, how do we use this, right? Like, but you can't. When it's negative on your side, yeah, you're giving initiative, but it's not like the Kitty Pryde effect where you eventually put that power back on. Like, it's just straight up negative power, right? And you can't, like, it's not like a Void where you kick it over with Viper. You ain't kicking Man-Thing over, right? It doesn't make a damn difference. So from that perspective, you are right. It's funny because you have to tech the card Luke Cage into your own deck while also having to be wary of them having it as well, which is funny because from a tech perspective, say running like if you're running something like Rogue, you really need 2 Luke Cage effects, but you can't afford to not run Luke Cage yourself. So it puts Man-Thing in this precarious position. The other option is Enchantress, but if you don't fill the location, Luke Cage players will just play the Luke Cage in the Man-Thing location, which swipes them both out. So it's like, from a tech side of things, Man-Thing has a very complex, just complex situation. I don't know how else to say it. And I like that, though. I like when cards have macro elements, micro elements. I love when they're more complex than just the text. And I think Man-Thing is a good example of that.
The way that Toxic plays is you have a first couple of turns to push on one negative lane. The Green Goblin, the Hood with the Viper, the Sentry with the Viper. That's a win lane altogether. And then you have one other lane you need to win. Now, typically, this works by having a Doc Ock out there, pulling and forcing their hand, and then doing something to respond to that Doc Ock. Or you just have pure power with like a Sentry play and get the 10 power on there, or whatever that might be. And I think Man-Thing is really meant for that other lane, or he's meant simply paired up with something like Green Goblin, right? You just play the Green Goblin, you have the Man-Thing, all of a sudden the point swing is going to be so out of control and very tough for them to manage. And there's other cards that we can combo with that. When it comes to Man-Thing, what I think he's going to be really good against, Sarah decks are going to have a hard time, obviously, but not quite bounce, right? Because he's not inflicting this negative. He's just having this like ever-presence, right? So if you put him down on 4, by that time, they can just respond with the bounce and get the hell out of that lane, right? And then you kind of have somewhat of a deadish lane after that, right? So I don't see him really impacting bounce all that much as he would, let's say, Sarah, Elsa deck, sure. And then what we talked about last week, which I think Brood kind of decks are going to suffer massively with him as well.
Yeah, he attacks Brood, he attacks Ultron, he attacks anything that likes to zoo, right? In those situations, the best thing for Man-Thing is to be put in the Angela location, which is likely to be zooed in. But again, Kitty Pryde can dodge it, right? But there's likely to be 3 or 4 cards in that location because you're probably comboing the Bloodstone with the Angela, etc., right? So again, this card has immense macro kind of considerations, and I like that. I like when cards come out complex.
Yeah, so, okay, first question before we go into synergy cards. Will you run an Enchantress or Rogue in your Man-Thing deck? And the reason I say Rogue, obviously, is you're just stealing the Luke Cage at that point, right? You're not even trying to, which kind of works as 2 birds with 1 stone. You need the Luke Cage anyway, and so you're kind of fishing it out there. Problem is, these days, I feel like Luke Cage is played later than 2, and then he's kind of played at the end to have this kind of mass flip surprise with Shadow King.
I think it's Rogue, not Enchantress. And specifically for ladder. I think it's always Rogue because you're conserving, it's just cheaper, right? If they play their Luke Cage on 2, which is not unlikely in a ladder situation, if they're holding that as a 2-drop and they don't know what you're playing, they might just get it out for the value because they're just going to get it out. And the result of that is if you happen to draw your Luke Cage, you don't even have to play it. You don't have to commit that energy. That's 2 energy, 2 power you don't have to put on the board. You steal their their effect, and then now you're ready to go, right?
Yep.
So I think that it's Rogue that's probably the winner if you're looking for a specific tech piece. That's a whole other conversation. I've actually been really liking Rogue in general.
Yeah.
I've been playing a lot of Rogue lately.
Yeah.
And so I think that Rogue's the winner.
Yeah, so I wanted let's go and talk then about cards with Man-Thing, the synergy that we see. And again, I'm probably all in on Toxic because here's the most important thing to remember with the card. When we say this a lot, the card's going to get better over time. Truly, though, we have some months, cards ahead. We have a huge one, a massive, probably the best thing to happen that's going to solidify the glue in Annihilus coming out into the game. Annihilus is going to be absolutely massive for the Toxic archetype. And then in December, we have, I think, Selene. So those two cards together alone are going to bring a lot of heat. So, you know, the great thing is not a good spotlight week. I think we can both agree on this. I think we've both rated this a skip week. But he's 3,000 tokens. So, guys, you can either get him as a Series 4 card. You can wait. He's in a December spotlight as well. This is for sure a token shop buy, in my opinion, over opening him. And if you play the play style, I think it's an easy buy. If you don't, it's an easy skip. Just depends.
Yeah, that's actually, it could not be clearer than that, right? Like, this is a card that, I don't want to say it's a one-trick pony, but this is a Toxic card, right? That's what this card does. Yeah. If you don't play that archetype, if you don't want to play that archetype, which I don't know how, like, the last Toxic evil deck you released was absolutely insane. I absolutely loved it. If you don't want to play, you just don't spend those 3,000 tokens. It's that simple. It's not gonna be like what Elsa Bloodstone did, where it's everywhere. It's gonna have its place and it's gonna do its job. Yeah. But yeah, the 3,000 tokens component, especially considering how bad the Spotlight Cash is, yeah, 100%.
Well, I want to transition with that and talk these synergy cards, and I'm gonna throw one at you after Green Goblin that I think not a lot of people are putting together. It's a card I've been playing more, like clearly just this season. Green Goblin, though, let's start here. I think this is going to be one of the most natural cards that work with it. We're going to be ranking our top 10. We don't know each other's, but Green Goblin is bound to be on that list for both of us. He was something that fell off in August because of Destroy Season, and now he's kind of creeping back in as a really good card. And I dare say, Alex, one of the most skillful cards to use in the game, mainly because of prediction and what you can combine with Green Goblin as a whole. So one cheeky thing that I don't think people know, this is one of the things I opened up with, that you learn more over time. You can Ghost Spider Green Goblin, even though it's on the opponent's side. So you can play Green Goblin in a lane that you think is for sure safe. And then on the very next play, you can Viper, Green Goblin, or you would actually then do the Ghost Spider, then the Viper play. And yeah, you risk putting the Ghost Spider on their side. Either way, though, you're pushing two cards over to that lane instantaneously, and that just throws off what they assumed was going to happen the next turn. So there's a lot of cheeky things with Titania. We know back in the day that you could do with Green Goblin. So he's kind of, deceptively very skillful of a card.
Yeah, and if you're worried about power, like, you can play him into an Angela. Like, that's something that I don't see often. If you play him into an Angela, Angela will get the buff, and then the Green Goblin's going to go over, right? So you kind of double dip a little bit there. I love the inclusion of Ghost Spider, because that dodge is one of Green Goblin's biggest weaknesses, is the ability for destroy decks to just, well, I'm just going to carnage this, right? Like, I'm just going to play Deathlock or whatever. When you move it, you disrupt their plan, and all of a sudden, right, it's like, well, it's still there. What are you going to do? You don't want to Venom it now, right? And when you get to those later turns, like, Venom's not necessarily a good answer to it. So I do like that a lot. Green Goblin, like, yeah, it's going to make a lot of sense, especially when you start considering, like, Green Goblin's going to take up space. You're likely to see, other cards occupying space on the board in the disruption and toxic style list. So yeah, it could be annoying to deal with Green Goblin for sure.
All right, so you ready for this one? This is a card that I've been playing a lot with Elsa list, kind of, but more so just in the meta at the moment. Buddy, I never thought to, and you could call it a reach, but I think right now is the time. If you're gonna want to play her, Lady Deathstrike and Man-Thing almost seem like they were meant for one another, right? You're pushing -2 on that opponent's side, which drastically changes the landscape of what Lady Deathstrike can do. And all of a sudden, it takes this con, and you essentially are making her like a 5/6 of sorts, right? Because you're allowing her to be able to push down and kill some cards that might have scaled up, like Bishop or Angela at that point. So I love the idea of her and Man-Thing. But regardless of that, I just want to say, if you're not playing Lady Deathstrike right now, dude, it's fantastic. On the Angela and the Elsa lanes, Collector and Loki decks, have you experimented with her?
No, I've actually not been playing much Lady Deathstrike, so no, I can't actually contribute that much to what you're so excited about because I've kind of pushed her to the wayside, like I think everyone else has, right?
Yeah.
But it got me thinking here: is that why Lady Deathstrike is with Man Thing in the bundles, or what? Is that something we've been sleeping on in the spotlight caches?
Yeah, very much well could be. She listen, it's not that she's a terrible card. Like now that they've taken her up to 4 power, she like has a purpose, but the decks need to be right for her to feel good, and bounce right now, or flood decks as you want to call it, is that kind of purpose. People are playing cheap cards, big abilities to try to get them to work and really try to scale them up. But with priority, dude, people will retreat so fast when all of a sudden their Mysterio, Angela, and Bishop dies in the same like it's such a huge counter to their entire game plan of what they were trying to accomplish. Hell, you can snipe a Kitty Pryde out. It's not perfect. She still has her weaknesses of what they are. But with Man-Thing even more, I think this could be a cheeky addition, although then you would have to cut Green Goblin out of the deck, or, you'd have to figure out how you're going to do that game plan a little bit different. But give her a shot, man. Give her a shot. I think she's not half bad.
I will give her a shot, and I'm going to demand that you give my card a shot, because there's a card that as soon as I saw Man Thing, I'm like, this is the card. This is the synergy I want to work around to start with. It's Abomination. Abomination does benefit from the negative power, and so I think that one of the first lists I'm going to work with regards to Man Thing, ironically, not just Toxic, but I think there's going to be a chance for high evolutionary based lists to be able to take advantage of the Man Thing, because the negative push across the negative push across the opponent's side of the board is significant for Abomination.
I love it, man. I love it. More high Evo out there. You love to see it. I thought you were going to bring up potentially the card that you love to talk about in Nebula. I was thinking about some Nebula stuff going on. Think about how Nebula works, Alex, and how you force them to play their cards at that lane. What cards would they be playing in that lane, right?
Yeah, like, well, Kitty Pryde is the annoying one.
Yes.
Right? But yeah, they're going to be playing anything they can, right? They're going to be playing cards that like consistently want to play into it, because they're just going to want to make sure that they pin that Nebula down. Is there a specific card you're thinking of, though?
Well, my thought is if I play Nebula on 1, to follow up Nebula to keep the balance in check, they play a 2-cost, they play a 3-cost card. So I'm forcing them to try to play these cards all in one lane together. That was kind of my, Jean Grey, I like the idea of it, but by that time, there's been a lot kind of pumping, and you can, they probably have gotten some of their cards out of the way. Now, Jeff, Nightcrawler, like, these are going to be problems, right? Which is why I think Man-Thing is going to be great later on. But I like the idea of, like, this certainly has them playing their 1- and 2-cost cards, their Mobius in that lane.
Yeah, okay. I get that. And also, the other thing about it is that it's going to force out their Luke Cage early if they have it. Because if they have the Nebula and they're holding Luke Cage, like, they're like, am I just going to let this Nebula buff, or do I play it down? You play the Luke Cage into the Nebula location, and then you follow up with the Rogue or whatever, even Enchantress if you have to. Like, you actually deal with the Luke Cage right off the bat. Or, again, like you said, if you're going to play the Man Thing on turn 6, now you just know, like, oh, I'm not playing it on turn 6 now, right?
Right. And like, with that in mind, it could easily be a 4-cost that follows this up. But do you feel like, and I'm trying to think of more like cheeky synergies, do you feel like Storm would be a decent synergy with Man-Thing because you play her down, then him?
The concern with Storm I have is that, yes, you are right, because that's a great trade, especially since it's mana efficient. It's so energy efficient. It's if you don't have an answer for Luke Cage, so if you think about it, Luke Cage affects the entire board, whereas Man-Thing affects an entire location. So they don't have to be played together. Luke Cage does not have to be in the Storm location to still protect them from Man-Thing.
The more we talk about this, the more it feels like, and if I'm going to be quite honest, it is like they call it skill issue or whatever with Toxic decks sometimes, or other decks out there. Man-Thing might be one of those cards truly that is like way up here at the high levels of competitive play, and then way down here at the lower levels, because you could theoretically start doing these decks with Luke Cage, Enchantress, and Lizard, right? Because you now have Luke Cage to help you Lizard, and then you have Man-Thing, but you have to dodge and know where you're playing them. Maybe you have a Ghost Spider in there, but that's like, there's a lot. Anytime, have you had decks, right? Like, I remember I had a Sarah Shadow deck where you had Shadow King in a Sarah deck, and you're like, wait, this is stupid. Or Shadow King in a Surfer deck nowadays, because you're almost hurting yourself, but at high levels of play, it makes sense because you know where you're going to take advantage of these cards.
Yeah, because you need the answer. Like it's about the tool for the time. Like when there's a time to use that tool, you have it, right?
Yeah.
No, I agree 100%, right? It's like what Goose did to so many decks before Silver Surfer became a staple part of Goose. You had to play around Goose. It's the same reason why people in the past at least would play like Wong and Cosmo together, or would play Cosmo and something like a Spectrum. Like, yeah, you could screw yourself, but at the same time, like just don't screw yourself. Like just learn the play pattern and get it good, get right. So it's like I totally get what you're saying, man.
Dude, I love that you said, honestly, so I have like a list of cards right here that I have that synergize some really cheeky things. I didn't even think about this. If you can get the Zabu play out, it's kind of genius. I haven't played this cat in so long. It's kind of genius to play Goose down with Zabu, because then you can play your Man-Thing into a location where they can only play in Man-Thing's range. That's kind of hot.
I didn't consider that at all.
Until you said
you
it.
just hit me with some like straight up like blessed knowledge here. I didn't consider, that's actually a huge thing. And like really, Goose is never dead in your hand. Let me just think here. Like, because if you're running like debris, you can access that location. That's interesting, man. That's really interesting. I like it a lot. And hey, whoa, hold on. You could play Man-Thing and then follow up Goose on 5. Like it doesn't have to be the other way around. So if you don't draw your Zabu, you can still play, Man-Thing and then Goose on top of that location. They're just like, well, what do I do now, right? So it's not as good as what you were suggesting, but I'm just throwing it out there that there are options.
Well, and this kind of leads me to where I think he's going to work, right? We have Toxic Disrupt decks, clearly. You have the pure Disrupt kind of feel where it's the Doc Ock deck. Then you have like the Hazmat deck. But then, what else do you have? I think a Spectrum deck, right? Because the other thing you could take advantage of Man-Thing is that you can theoretically bump him up in a little bit of power. All of a sudden, Luke Cage, Goose, Man-Thing, those are some of the cards in the deck. They're all ongoing. Zabu, ongoing. You add a couple of 4 costs in there. We've seen Spectrum starting to rise a tad bit in some play, and all of a sudden you have Mojo, Ant-Man. I'm thinking you could put together a competitive ongoing deck with Goose, potentially. And the great thing about all this, Alex, is that Man-Thing is going to be the worst that he is now. I'm telling you right, the cards coming out in November and December are going to amp him up to a competitive, super competitive state. But I like the Spectrum idea.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing about Spectrum is that it's one of those cards that has been like, I know, again, we joke about this, we say it all the time, but Spectrum's a card that really benefits from new releases, especially when they're inexpensive. So yeah, like I do see that potentially working. Overall, Spectrum still feels like a little undertuned.
Oh, for sure.
But at the same time, like we're also forgetting that early Pool 3 Spectrum Destroyer is still awesome deck, right? It's still a really good deck. Actually, I've seen flashes of it every once in a while. So it's like it creeps back up a little bit, but Spectrum is one of those cards that maybe could use some love, and maybe for a future discussion on this podcast.
The 2 cards that I foresee being probably in a staple. Number 1, Debris. We know this already. We're going to talk about Debris in our top 10s, I'm sure. Debris, you are limiting their space so significantly, especially if you play her out with an Angela Lane and you're predicting where to play her out and how to play her out. But you're just constricting their play. So like Green Goblin, obviously Viper, which we can talk about here in a little bit, and Debris, all of a sudden now you're pushing all this crap, and sure, maybe they loot cage, but at that point they are losing out on the minimal space that they have to make their deck work.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like each location only has 4 slots, and each of them is so important. And when you're running these like very negative effects, it's like, what do you do? Like if you have like a goblin on your side and a rock that's being kind of put down by Man-Thing, like what do you even attack that location with? Like, because it's like, okay, they're shooting all this garbage over. Viper kicked over a hood. Like, you really commit your turn 6 Hulk just for that side? Yeah, of course. Widow's Bite's probably on the board as well at that point. So yeah, like I think you're right. It's going to be problematic for a lot of archetypes that kind of consider themselves on top right now.
Well, lastly, dude, before we go to our top 10, because I think some of the other cards we'll talk about, we're just going to naturally talk about in our top 10 Toxics. I think Polaris finally gets a little bit more of a purpose here. Playing her alongside into your Man-Thing lane is kind of cool. I think that has some nice synergy. One of the few that can target these style of cards. So I do like the idea of playing that all together. With that, though, we're going to put Man-Thing in this list, Alex, but I want to talk about our top 10 Toxic cards, right? So these are the cards, Disrupt Toxic, that make the biggest effect in those decks, right? Maybe they're not, the single best, looking card or their ability, but they make the biggest difference overall in their playstyle, in their deck. And I thought this would be super easy. And then I started putting cards that kind of belong with the toxic cards as well. It's kind of hard. I have 3 out that should be in, and I like to see that. I like it when it's not. Was it tough for you to make this list?
Extremely hard. Extremely hard. And it's one of those things where, like, I'll be honest with you, like, I have not considered a top 10 toxic list until we discussed doing it. So I'm like, And if I just rewrite this list over and over again, I think it's going to change a bit.
Yep.
I got a bunch left off. Let's do some honorable mentions first. Let's get this out of the way,
hit me
because I
one.
have some honorable mentions that are painful.
Hit me with one.
I have Debris as an honorable mention. I know, because you just said, like, oh, we're going to talk about Debris on our top 10s. And I'm like, bro.
You're like,
cut that out, buddy. She didn't make it for me. I got Debris.
Okay,
on, my
I'll save
mentions.
I'll reserve my my statements on Debris for when I talk about her. I have, and this one was tough, dude, because there's some that like define the archetype. Scorpion's on the outside looking in for me right now too, which is just like weird as a toxic card, but where he stands at the moment, it's like, woof, you are losing out on a lot of value. He's almost, listen, I'm going to talk about him in the next subject too, so I'll refrain it, but he almost feels weird at a 2 cost. Is my general consensus after all the cards that you could play. So I do have Scorpion outside looking in. Kick us off with number 10, Alex. The top 10, we got number 10 for the toxic archetype. What do you got?
No, you're going to be so mad.
Okay.
You're going to be so mad.
Well,
You're going to wish I
Debri's
did more
already
of the
cooked me
honorable
up.
mention. You're like, how is this your 10? Oh, you're going to be so upset with me. Green Goblin's my 10. Tell me how disappointed you are that Green Goblin's 10 on my list.
I'm disappointed. I am disappointed because of where he is on my list in comparison. I think at one point he definitely could have been there, and I think that this happens to be where he belongs. Between Loki decks and bounce decks and zoo decks and just Elsa decks in general, what he's doing to complicate the game is the best he's ever been at it, right? So obviously he has Destroy. He has things that can hurt him. You have to be a little bit risky. But the skill gap is what really raises him up. So I'm a little offended. But hey, everybody, we all have our own list. It's your list, not mine. It's all good. I'll tell you what's on my list here, buddy. I have at number 10 here. And I have to ask you a question. Did you have difficulty placing Hazmat?
Yes.
Is she an HM on your list?
She is an honorable mention on my list, and I couldn't believe I did it.
She is on mine too, and she defines the toxic archetype, right? But she truly, the problem with her is like, in theory, she's so cool, but you have to hold on to her, and if you don't get Luke Cage, it just feels awful, right? She's good. She's good. I'm not saying she's a bad card, but it's just, she's so weird. It's why she doesn't work in Cerebro 2 with Luke Cage, and there's too much punishment, and the deck's so tight. So I thought that was it. I wanted to call that out before it all too, and so I think people might be kind of shocked by that. This is where, and maybe you're shocked, I have the Thing for High Evo. Obviously, we include some High Evo cards. I've got the Thing. Now, he is one of those that, stats-wise, he's going to pretty much make the list as far as, like, good value stats. And it was hard to do this top 10, but I have him here at number 10. He's dependent on how many cards are in the lane. He does afflict, and so he makes the Abomination decks feel wonderful altogether. But in the rate that I use these decks, even in the High Evo versions, I just have him here at number 10. So he's a little bit lower than the ones I have above.
Number 9 for me is actually probably in terms of variance, has one of the best sets of variance in the game consistently, and that's Sentry. Sentry comes in at number 9 for me. I know some people might not consider him a toxic card, but that Void's pretty toxic. It works wonderfully with toxic cards, and for me, 9 is where Sentry comes in.
Awesome. I'll talk about him in a bit. Definitely like the pick, though. Glad he made your list. I'm glad he made your list. For me, I try to think about truly the deck that I've been playing for about 3 weeks and where are they currently at, which if we were to make this list even a month ago would be way different because it's all dependent on the meta. Mojo is what I have at number 9, which Mojo, you might be like, he's not a toxic card. I got to put him in with this list. This is where Hazmat, Scorpion, they could have made the list if I took Mojo out. But truly, right now, when I think about the toxic archetype, when I think about Elsa, Mojo Man is such a good card to place in here. He punishes the opponent. You're building your own Mojo up with this. He's easy to fit in with Doc Ock, Green Goblin, Debris, Viper. He has the direct synergy, and then he is an answer upon answers to Elsa decks. So I've got Mojo at number 9.
I like that call. I had not considered Mojo, honestly, and straight up. But what you just said makes perfect sense. Like, you take the idea of like, oh, hopefully they play here, and you just play there yourself.
Yep.
You just buff up the Mojo, right? I like that call. I kind of wish I thought of it first, Cozy. Good call. Number 8. Are we ready to go to number 8?
Hit me with 8.
Okay, this is a card that I've always loved, and I've always tried to put in decks. One of my favorite value cards in the game, as a 5/8 Spider-Woman. Spider-Woman is making a comeback, and I couldn't be more happy. Like, I actually really like Spider-Woman, and special shout out for all the Iron Man players out there that really hate Spider-Woman, because like the amount of damage it does to an Iron Man lane is pretty heavy. But yeah, I think Spider-Woman's been making a comeback. I mean, you've been using it in several decks. I think it's been used, which is kind of crazy. It's just good. Like 5/8 value up towards a 5/12, and I mean with Iron Man it's even more. I love it.
Yeah, I think Spider-Woman is, quite frankly, she's perfectly designed, right? So the reason of it is, even if they play a Luke Cage on you on turn 6, you're getting like an arrow that, yeah, you know, we all played arrow in a lane. They already played it, and you're like, you know, well, at least I got 8 points on the board. Like, it's the same thing, right? Like, you're still getting 8 power points. You know, you lost out on a little bit of that interactions, but she's punishing. So I like that. This is where I have Sentry myself. Sentry, you know, I didn't start off super hot on the card. He felt, what it bugged me was the left and the middle lane restriction. It always just kind of felt bad, weird. I didn't like it. But the simple fact of playing him and Viper, him and Valkyrie just feel, it's so game winning. It's disgusting. I will say the only problem with him is, if you have him in the deck, your opponent is already on the lookout. Like, gone are the days where you can sneak the Viper play or sneak the Valkyrie play as easy as it used to be. Sometimes they're going to count that lane out regardless, and so that can be a little bit tough. But don't forget, you can fill out the lane before you play him. He's an excellent turn 5/6 play as well that works with some cards. So I think Sentry, alongside Zabu and Man-Thing, could definitely find himself, you know, winning you toxic games. We are on to number 7. Who's that for you?
For me, I have this saying. I always say, always believe in the Hob of the Gob. Gotta love Hobgoblin. And he comes in for me at 7, which I know is probably high for most people. But in my experience, first of all, Hobgoblin is single-handedly trying to keep Galactus alive. Like, this card is carrying so much weight for an archetype that's been beat on. So there's that. The other thing about Hobgoblin is that playing it on turn 5, when it's played against me, it's like, I really don't want to have to deal with that on turn 6. Like, unless if I'm playing Evo, then maybe I just outpower it with a Hulk or whatever. But like, if the Hobgoblin comes down on turn 5, it's like, you don't want to commit resources on turn 6 to deal with it. Like, you usually have to just give that location. And I think that's really interesting. The card is immensely disruptive when it lands. It's a very high risk, high reward card, to the point that you try not to play without something like Daredevil. But I like Hobgoblin. And I just think that it's one of those cards that when it drops on the other side of the board, I think your opponent feels really bad.
Okay, yeah. I don't have Hobgoblin on my list at all. I respect
that.
I feel like, funny enough, and we can just talk about it, I had him actually on my buff list. I think a -9 is not the worst thing in the world to him. If you did take down Galactus, that's a way of helping him out. There's plenty of ways to deal with the guy, and or with the -8, you're already winning that lane most of the time. So, like, what's the extra -1? And it's the 5 cost, right? Like, Ravona's best thing was that 4 -8 was, like, perfect, felt really good. And he's just -8 straight up and takes up a slot in one of the most crucial turns in Snap. I'd almost rather have 4 -6 on a consistent basis. Does that make sense?
No, it does. I totally understand what you're saying. For me, I think what elevated it was that, like, you have Galactus. You have an archetype that, like, I know it's very polarizing, but there are people out there that love that archetype. And this card single-handedly is keeping it afloat.
Yes.
Like, it is the card that makes Galactus still viable, still playable, because it needs more power. It needs to gap that difference somehow. The nerf has to be gapped somehow, and it's Hobgoblin that's doing it. And so for me, it just raises in value. And that's kind of where my head was at. Like, this card, in terms of meta relevance, it's single-handedly keeping Galactus alive. So that's why I kind of raised it a bit on my list. But you are right. Individually, it's not as good as the sum of its parts.
Well, I've got Debris here. You left her off the list. I feel like Debris might be one of the more perfectly balanced cards in the game, right? Because it feels... She is a very skill-rewarding card. You have to know location play. You have to have good guesstimations of where they're going and how to fill things out. A well-timed debris is a game winner, right? We all know that. But why she's so good is gone are the days where you have to have the hazmat debris thing. She now is working just with how the deck works. The deck is trying to pump out this power on your side while pushing and limiting the opponent. And debris outside of Killmonger, who's also getting less play, is why she's where she's at now. Man-Thing coming out, and we have Man-Thing in both of our lists today. We try to guess where he is going to be. Just makes her all that much better. I like debris. I think debris is definitely a staple in a lot of my own lists, and it just works with how the deck works in general. So I've got debris here at number 7. Number 6, Alex.
Number 6 is where I put the Thing, the evolved the Thing. It's still a very good card, and the key thing about it is, of course, its interactions with Abomination in those style lists. It just never feels bad playing the Thing, especially when you consider how powerful on aggregate Evo decks are anyways. So in terms of meta relevance and overall power, I think the Thing is a pretty good solid pick at 6. Although, I gotta tell you, after thinking about it, I do kind of regret not having debris on this list. So that's a whole other conversation.
No, I don't fault you for having them or having them this high. Definitely makes sense, especially if you've been on a high Evo kick lately. Number 6 for me is where my Spider-Woman is placed. Kind of talked about her on yours, but just the simple fact of what she can do to flip and turn the tide of battle. Number 5, I'll just lead into is this is where I've got the Green Goblin. Right, this is where I've got the Goblin.
Oh no, that's not what I expected.
What'd you think? What
I thought you were gonna say this is where I got Man-Thing, because that's what I did. I put Man-Thing at 5. You said this is where I've got. I'm like, oh, we did it. We picked the same spot. We didn't. Okay, Green Goblin's your 5, and then Man-Thing's my 5. So this is where I think Man-Thing slides in here. You know what, dude? I got to agree. I think Green Goblin I probably undersold, but at the same time, it's like I think it's gonna get better, especially as right now destroys on the downhill. I wonder if Man-Thing really propels Green Goblin to the next stage of power, where I can be sold in it being 5.
He's a scary card to play at times. You have to be confident in where you're going to play him. He can kick you back in the butt, but Green Goblin, for the cost amount, feels fantastic to me. Number 4.
Number 4 for me is Viper. Viper is just, I think, every single Toxic Disruption deck starts with Viper. It's synergy with Debris. It's synergy with the Void, the Hood. Like, there's so many different cards that it just works so well with. And not only are you putting up a decent stat line on your side, basically the core stat line of the 2 costs, the 2/3, but you're also sending over garbage to their side, which synergizes with the rest of your deck, takes away valuable space on their side of the board. Can also be used defensively if someone really, really likes Green Goblin and decides to throw Green Goblin on you somewhere. I like the card. It's one of those cards that feels pretty balanced because, like, you know, there's an RNG element to it. So if like someone throws Green Goblin on a lane, you can't just be like, well, send that card over. If you want to roll the dice on it, go ahead, I guess. But I really like Viper here at 4.
Yeah, I've got Viper coming up next, so I'll just list mine and then I'll talk on Viper. So my 4 is Doc Ock. We can get to him. I'm sure he'll be on yours. Viper's my 3. So Viper to me is one of the most cornerstones of the deck. I feel like when I have Viper in my starting hand, I know I'm probably going to win, or at least I know how I'm going to win or what I need to do. I don't have Hood on my list. Obviously, I don't, he feels like he belongs in Toxic. I don't have him directly as a Toxic card. The Hood as a follow-up, Debris, Sentry, but on top of that, you also can just clog them. Like, you just do the math trade-off, and you're like, all right, I'm giving up whatever it is. Maybe it's, not a negative card, but then you're trading off that with, you can win that location, and she's giving you power. So she has a huge swing in value. She feels like the cornerstone of Toxic to myself. So I love Viper, and the fact that Annihilus is just an AoE Viper is stupid good. I cannot even imagine how good Toxic will be after he comes out. Doc Ock is my 3, Alex. Do you happen to have Doc Ock at 3?
You did this to me again. You just said, like, oh, you definitely have Doc Ock, and he goes, Doc Ock is not on my list. I associated Doc Ock with disruption, not with toxicity. So, like, I did not actually use Doc Ock here. So, once again, you've set me up for the roast here, which is fine. Because, like, I get where you're going with this. Because, like, the Doc Ock list that you released with, like, obviously Toxic, and it was evil. It's damn evil. And it's a great card for exactly what it is. But, like, sometimes Doc Ock punches you right in the pants so hard.
Yeah.
So I'm interested in hearing your sell on it being this high. It's actually way higher than I thought you'd have put it.
For sure. I love it because like I've seen people like say, oh, it doesn't have hazmat. It's on a toxic deck. To me, toxic and disrupt are the same thing. It's like, right. It's just like pissing off your opponent. The deck is toxic. Doc Ock is synergizing with everything else that we've been trying to do, right? So Mojo, to my point, works really well. If you don't want the repercussions of Doc Ock, you've maybe already filled their lane with a Viper card with a Green Goblin, so the trade-off doesn't feel nearly as bad. You're pumping out a lot of power. You've got Ghost Spider that's synergizing with your Spider Woman and with your Green Goblin and some of your other cards like Sentry, so then you can also play Doc Ock, move him out of the way. I happen to have this list, and this isn't exactly tuned up all the way, but in this list here, right, we've got a lot of cards that already fill their lane, and this one runs a Shang-Chi. So you have your Doc Ock. Yes, Alioth is a pain in the ass. Shang-Chi exists on the opponent's side, but with this list, you now have something to follow up with your Doc Ock. So what feels extremely good, and what I might run in with the Man-Thing deck if Zabu gets prevalent, is you play your Doc Ock on 5, your opponent has their Infinite, their American Chop, whatever it might be, right there, and then you just Shang-Chi it, and all of a sudden, they're out, they're loose, and you already have, you know, your other Green Goblin location, whatever that might be, right? So Doc Ock just fits the archetype. He feels really good to play, and with the synergy and Mojo, that's why I've got him where I've got him.
It makes perfect sense, and it's kind of interesting because I think you're not going to have my 3 either. And it's just like I didn't have your 3. I wonder if it's a similar situation where you didn't consider my 3 a toxic card.
Okay.
But 3 is where I put, which I feel like I talk about too often, is Abomination. Because this card just loves these toxic effects. Now, its application is a little more niche in the types of decks because of obviously high evolutionary. But evolutionary toxic, evolutionary debuff, even evolutionary versions running hazmat all see Abomination as a linchpin card. The issue, of course, is going to be the prevalence, the 32.9% prevalence of Triple M, right? Which really impacts this card negatively. So now you're in a situation where I think a bomb could be one of the best cards in Snap from a value perspective, but not only are you being impacted by Triple M, you're also being impacted by Luke Cage. So it has this double-pronged like counter where it's like if they have Luke Cage, a bomb's not useless, but it's a 5/9, feels a little gross. If they have the Mobius, then you're screwed. If they have Luke Cage, you're screwed. So there's this like double-pronged negative kind of counter towards Abomination, which I think holds them back.
Yeah, in the decks that he works, definitely. I didn't consider him a toxic card on my list, but again, in the high Evo builds, which is what we're going to see some blends of, I can see it working. The one that I left off is probably on your 2 or 1, and it's kind of crazy, but when I looked at all my 10 here, I left off Leech, even though Leech is like the toxic card. He's the one that people freaking hate. Just in the play style of how I played, I've left him off outside of the Psylocke build that I had, because you have other 5 costs at that point, like Spider-Woman, like Doc Ock. Number 2 is where I have Man-Thing. I truly think Man-Thing in his archetype is going to be massive. He's going to be an absolute massive card. Yes, he's only going to be a 4/5 if they happen to get something going with Luke Cage. But I think there's going to be deck design around that. I really do. And speaking towards the future, this is where he's going to belong. And I think Man-Thing, if I look at the cards below him, what he's offering and the presence of him in one lane, especially, Alex, as a late game play. I'm just telling you, if you could play him and Shang-Chi together after a Doc Ock, it just feels like this could be a dominant card in Snap. That being said, don't buy him unless you like how you play the archetype. You have another day to play the archetype to see if you like it. But I have Man-Thing at number 2. Is this where the card I just said is on your side?
You called it. It's Leech. For me, number 2 is where Leech comes in. And it's because it's the most frustrating card in Marvel Snap. It's toxic as hell on a number of different levels.
Yep.
How can you kind of surpass the toxicity of just disabling the hand of your opponent? But they still get to top deck, by the way. I think that's something that takes a lot of people by surprise. Like, I've been leashed before and top decked Shang-Chi and been like, okay, I wonder if they expect me to Shang-Chi here. And they do not expect me to Shang-Chi. So that sometimes works to my advantage.
No doubt Leech is without question toxic. And I'm just going to take a guess. We both have high Evo Psylocke at the number 1 spot, dude. Golly, is this guy a menace? An absolute... it doesn't even matter if you play him after Storm. It doesn't matter where you play him.
Every single archetype has its key component. Its card that overperforms in that archetype. The genre-defining card. And Cyclops is exactly that. I think it's one of the top cards in Marvel Snap. Like, when you see Cyclops on a lane and you don't have Luke Cage, you're just like, It's an unbelievable card.
And he is. He's up there as one of the best cards now, not only for the Toxic Archetype, but just high Evo decks in general and the playstyle that they have. Let's go ahead and move on, though. We got one last subject here. We've got buffs and nerf wish list. We'll keep it somewhat short. However, I think we could both agree, pretty shocked at how lackluster the content patch was and the OTA. Cable feeling weird at a 3-4. Maria Hill was the only true winner of that, and I'm going to talk about her a little bit more on your side of things. What do we want? What do we want out of this? Because it feels close, and I wanted to open the conversation with an apology, okay? Sometimes Loki, when he comes out, feels fun. He's a lot of fun. He's great, and over time, he gets a little bit out of hand, right? I've been a big defender of Alioth, but I did state this last week, even with my defense, I would like to see the cards have an on-reveal effect still, and then they get destroyed, right? So that you can have counterplay at hand. There are things that need to happen. I think that needs to happen with Alioth. I think you got to make him a 6-4 so that you can have other cards beat him across, or you go ahead and have the on-reveal trigger. I think they're more likely to do the 6-4 effect, but at this point, the first I want to kick this off with a nerf I think needs to happen, and that's Alioth.
People are very upset with Alioth. I think this is getting close to the kind of meta impact that Leader had. Like the idea of like this turn 6 play just wins and I can't do it. But Leader was way worse because you just played anywhere and it just replicates their play and they just lose. Like there's no soul read. Leader had no soul read. So objectively, I think Alioth is better than that, right?
Yeah.
However, it is extremely uninteractive for the player being Alioth. It's extremely frustrating. But at the same time, Cozy, and I had this thought, we're also not teching against Alioth very well. Like if you tech Cosmo, if you tech armor, if you tech, like there's ways to deal with Alioth, and the tech is not making the top lists. So we're getting these top base win rate lists. We're playing them, and they all run Alioth, but none of them run the tech because, and here's the challenge, you're not running the tech because it counters your own damn Alioth. People that are, I don't want to say it, very general, but when you lose to Alioth and you have Alioth in your deck, you probably shouldn't be mad. Because if you don't have Alioth in your deck, you can run Cosmo, you can run Armor, and then their Alioth is much less likely to be impactful. So I am very torn on this card.
I love him. I do. I love the card. Don't get me wrong. I think he's a lot of fun to be had. I think there's no reason not to have Alioth in your deck, and that's one of the sole problems. But also, making him a 6-4, I don't want to just clamor for that, because I do enjoy the card. And listen, Alioth is going to be a good card regardless. I want to combine this with some buffs that I want to make Alioth's presence feel less. First of all, just taking him to a 6-4. That's where I would like to start. It's what I wanted to see before Galactus got completely pushed to the ground. You have the psychological effect on players to not play him as much because he got nerfed. So you kind of take him out of the meta a bit. Leech had that impact massively. Shuri, we've seen this before. Good cards don't get played as much. But also, I want to lead into a buff that I would like to see. So we already had Doctor Doom, which I think was very much needed. Loved what Doctor Doom brought his 5 bots back. He could beat Alioth. But on the flip side, and you can play this, he's not a 6 cost, or she's not a 6 cost. I would like to see Captain Marvel go back to her original cost. She beats Alioth at that point. The Kraven deck is great, but now we have different answers to it. Elsa might put her over the top a bit, but it feels like this may be a card that I would like to see combat Alioth and bring a card back up instead of bringing a card down all the way. Any thought?
No, I like your idea. I like your idea a lot. In fact, in my buff list, I do have Cap Marvel because I love the card. It's one of my favorite cards in the game, and I feel like the nerf did it. It hurt it really bad, and that made me sad. But what I will say is that like I like your approach of okay, is Alioth itself truly the problem? I get what you're saying with the 6-4, but at the same time, it's like I don't know if that actually changes much because it's the initiative game that matters so much. If you have any initiative whatsoever, if they're just winning the location at all, it's an automatic win. And I think that's where people get frustrated. So it could be a 6-1 and it still does that job. But the idea of buffing something like a Captain Marvel that can counterplay the Alioth, where the Alioth player cannot influence the movement of Captain Marvel, cannot destroy Captain Marvel. I think that's where things get interesting. And again, I leave that to Glenn to try and sort out, I suppose.
I'm going to be brief with the last ones I have, but like Angel, Okoye, Strong Guy, Punisher, we need to see these. It's been long enough. We've talked about this guy too, but it makes even more sense now that Man-Thing comes out and Gladiator's coming out, which is his cohort in the Marvel universe. This card is dead. Colossus is a dead-ass card. It is a counter per se to Man-Thing, which we could have talked more about counters, but some of them are obvious. Colossus is a dead card. I think he will be buffed when Gladiator comes out. But, like, yeah, you could play this with your own Man-Thing. You could play it against it, but it's a 2-3. Mobius is a 2-3. Even a 2-4, start there. You know what I mean? But he definitely is just not great.
Yeah, he feels bad. And, I mean, early on in pool 1 and 2, he felt okay because I think the location pools is minimized. So you get a lot of like the sewer systems and like those negative locations. I think he feels better early, but as you kind of gain collection level, and I think they open up the locations a little more, suddenly Colossus feels awful. Like it feels completely irrelevant, no point of play. Even he gets cut from ongoing lists, which like if you're talking about doing ongoing Man-Thing, like this should be in the deck, but you're going to be running Luke Cage anyway, so why would you run this, right? He's 100% useless. I agree.
Any last buffs to mention or nerfs?
Yeah, I got a couple here. I want to talk about a couple. I got 2 buffs and 1 rework I want to talk about fast. The buffs, okay, we need Omega Red buffed, and I feel like this has to be an easier one. Talk about dials. He's got multiple dials. Do you buff his power? Do you buff the requirement for Omega Red? Do you buff the actual effect? 3 dials right off the top. Omega Red needs something. The other thing is I think that Master Mold needs a rework. And Master Mold was recently in a bundle. But one thing I will say is the idea I'm going to pitch is not something that I came up with. It actually was mentioned to me. Master Mold being reworked to, instead of just adding 2 Sentinels to the hand and having a base stat line of 2/2, but getting +1 for each Sentinel in play, whether on your opponent's side or your side. I think was a really cool idea that came from the community. That like the idea of like, hey, if they play those Sentinels, you're buffing my Master Mold, so keep them in your damn hand. I think that's really cool, and it would make so much more sense.
That's cool. I like that idea. That's a lot of fun, and it hits the lore, and then it also makes him like have his own unique deck play style behind it. There's locations that kind of help it as well. That's fun. I like that one a lot. I love unique approaches rather than just like a power boost, right? Some rapid fire ones that I have too. So this one's quick, but I just want to say I think Shauna is at a place now. If we look at Mysterio, and we talked about it last week, just give the word play to these cards. And why not? Why not? At this point, have it up with Mysterio. That is single-handedly going to make Shauna have a play deck and Elsa synergy. I think this is an easy fix. No question, right? Yeah, no question. Bishop synergy. I think that has to go. Negasonic, which I went to 2 costs because I wanted to pitch it. Negasonic in comparison to Eliath is a joke, as you know. I think either tone down the stats or tone down the cost and the stats and make her not die. Make her destroy the card. It's 1 card and make her not die. I get the risk-reward thing with her. You either need to buff up her stats to be a significant disadvantage like Maximus is or whatever it is. There has to be a stat adjustment and or an ability adjustment, especially because she's coming in a spotlight. And I can't see this Negasonic arrive. I can't.
We've called it in the past. We're like, there's no way that spotlight comes and that card's the way it is, right? And Negasonic has to be one of those cards that would change. We called it on Snowguard. And I got one more that I just have to say, Kang. Kang needs a rework. Okay, listen to this. Cozy, tell me how disgusting this is. Kang, a 6-cost card that undoes all negative effects that your board experienced. It reses Shang-Chi cards, it reverts toxic buffs, unless it's ongoing, and resets your board state as if none of it happened. Turn back time, my friend. Kang turns 6. What do you think?
Dude, that's an OP as hell card. That's OP. I love it. I mean, don't get me wrong. That'd be, if people hate him now, holy crap. After that animation, watching all your work get done, it's like reverse Galactus, you know? I saw the suggestion of letting him redraw for you. So, like, no matter what, he's a redraw on that turn. I kind of like that because it's like, all right, it's thematic. Listen, sign me up for your Kang. I'll buy that in a pack.
It's kind of funny though. Imagine you're like your Shang-Chi Devil Dinosaur just like resurrects because you turn back time. Kang just brought in another timeline, got another Devil Dinosaur. Galactus, they played Galactus, but the locations come back because he turned back time. That's a pretty cool Galactus nerf. Like, let's be honest.
I love the love for it. And even if it was restricted to the last turn, I think there could be cool stuff that you could do there. Maybe not the whole battle. Probably be a little wild, but also, hey, you know, maybe if it also like affected you, so like Gamma Lab would unhulk them. I don't know. Like, there's some play to it. Listen, Alex, I love it. I love it, and I love you. Guys, hopefully you enjoyed this episode of the Snapchat. Next week is our 50th episode. Absolutely wild, and cannot wait to get to that. We're going to be going over to Alex's side to be talking about Elsa and our thoughts on her. Also, the top 10 win rate cards. We talked about cubes, but this is what cards have the best win rate at the moment. And our favorite cards in the month of October. Both of our favorite segments every single month. Alex, another great episode, buddy. And as always, guys, we'll see you on the next Snapchat episode.